here as well, just in case. All right. Welcome everyone to our live video today. I'm Amy Zellmer. I am the admin of Amy's TBI Tribe, and I'm here today with Dr. Perry Maynard from Integrated Brain Centers in Denver, Colorado. And today we're just going to talk a little bit about who is Dr. Perry and how he kind of specializes in working with patients with vestibular issues and dysautonomia. And we'll kind of dive into what those conditions are. And yesterday we had Dr. Shane Stedman on, who is the owner of Integrated Brain Centers and works directly with Dr. Perry. So really excited to have you here today and share you with everyone in the tribe. So Perry, why don't we just start by, give us a little bit of who you are and how you came to work in the functional neurology world.
Definitely. So yeah, I've been in Denver working with Dr. Stedman for probably about 3.5 years. And before that, I was in Oregon working at a very similar clinic with Dr. Glenn Zielinski, where we did similar work. And honestly, I'll go back to that in a second of why I got into what I do, but a little bit about me. So what really got me into this line of work was really college. So in college, I played football. So took a lot of hits to the head. Had a lot of teammates who took a lot of hits to the head, and actually, unfortunately, have a handful of teammates who were on disability at age like 26 from seizures. They were left with, $60,000 medical bills from neurologists for head injuries, and the whole system was just absolutely broken. And there was nothing for any of my friends or myself as well. And it really wasn't until maybe a few years afterwards I started noticing some things I never really noticed while I played sports. Headaches all the time, feeling foggy, dizzy, nauseous, memory issues that really weren't like me. And so these things started to kind of come up. And while I was in school, I kind of got exposed to functional neurology, right? Which, I know Amy talks a lot about, and a lot of different doctors, things like that. But pretty much a field of neurology that doesn't really look at the brain from a standpoint of black or white, saying, do you have a tumor? Do you have a stroke? Is there something that we can see on an image? But really looking at functionality, right? Because so many individuals with head injuries, they go to doctors, they get images done, and the image looks fine, but their function isn't great, right? So that's what got me into functional neurology, was taking my background in neuroscience from undergrad and really figuring out how to apply it towards individuals, especially suffering from traumatic brain injuries. And not only traumatic brain injuries, but maybe inner ear disorders or things like dysautonomia, which could be things like POTS or vasovagal, which we'll talk about later. But that's kind of what got me into this, was my own experience with head injuries, and then seeing friends that I was very close with suffering, that still suffer to this day, because there's really nothing there for them, because medicine told them, well, they were just fine, right? There's nothing they could do about it. So it's kind of what got me into doing what I do.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people listening can probably relate to, there's nothing we can do. You're fine. This is the best you're going to be. There's nothing we can do to help you. And it's super frustrating, right? Not getting any answers. And, for me, it was 2.5 years till I found functional neurology. And fortunately for me, I saw results so quickly. We learned that for me, it was a lot of my eye issues. I had a lot of dizziness, balance. I'd run into things. And so that's, I think yesterday I said the top 3 complaints are typically, headaches, dizziness, and I forgot the third one. Memory. No. That wasn't it, but I don't remember right now. But yeah, headaches, dizziness. Oh, and then the visual stuff. Yeah, that was the third one. So, yesterday we talked a lot about the visual component of it. But today I want to jump into the vestibular, how the whole vestibular system works, because I think vestibular is a word a lot of us have heard, and some people have maybe gone to vestibular therapy. But what is vestibular? What is the vestibular system? What does it do for us, and how can it manifest as symptoms that we're dealing with?
For sure, and great question. So really when you look at the inner ear itself, right? So your inner ear sits kind of right in here, embedded in your skull, right? And so it sits right here, and then it's tethered from that bony structure all the way to your brainstem, right? And your inner ear, right, or your vestibular system is made up of a bunch of different sensors, but it really has everything to do with detecting gravity, okay? So as I sit still right here, gravity is constantly pushing down on me. So I have certain receptors that measure static push of gravity. And then if I tilt my head like this, now the vector of gravity changes on my head. Right? So you have certain receptors that are more static and have to do with, is my head straight? Is it left? Is it right? Is it tilting? And then you have more dynamic receptors that have fluid involved in them. And these have more to do with how quickly am I moving my head. So if I turn to the left, if I turn right, if I go to bend over and pick something up, those are detecting saying you're moving 500 degrees per second. And then they let you know when you stop, right? And the reason this is so important, this system is so important, is that you can never get away from gravity. Unless you live in a vacuum, you go to space, or
Right.
maybe you go deep sea diving, which changes gravity slightly, you can never get away from it, right? If you're light sensitive, you can go sit in a dark room. If you're sound sensitive, you can go sit in a quiet room. If there's a lot of ways to get away from these things, but gravity is constantly with you. So with head injuries, more often than not, individuals either damage their actual inner ear itself or that nerve. Remember we talked about that tether. So if you think about your brainstem like this, and then the string that goes and tethers, whenever you hit your brain, a lot of times that nerve gets sheared or gets damaged. So now the information coming from your inner ear becomes kind of scrambled. So you may now turn your head to the left, and your neck may say, I turn to the left, and then your inner ear says, oh no, I think we flipped backwards. And the brain's like,
Right.
what's going on, right? So it creates this mismatch, right? And the other thing is too, is that then all of that is processed in the brain in a variety of different areas, but you have to take your inner ear and then compare it with your eyes and your neck to say, is my head right? Is it left? Is it up? Is it down? So when the inner ear is damaged, it creates this huge mismatch. And the problem is that a lot will theorize that the inner ear is almost the most important because it gives you your starting point, right? So if I think about it, my ear gives me kind of my longitude and latitude, and then off of that, my eyes can now say, where's everything in reference to me? So a lot of individuals with visual complaints can sometimes be an inner ear issue because they just don't know where they are. So I would make the argument that it is almost one of the most foundational systems our brain has. And when it doesn't work well, people not only get dizzy, but they get anxious, they get depressed, they get angry, they have memory issues. So it doesn't just manifest in dizziness, it can manifest in a whole slew of different symptoms. So it's a really, really important part of the brain that's disrupted quite a bit with head injuries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you throw perhaps a neck or whiplash injury on top of it, and you have even a bigger mismatch. And, when you think about the vast majority of people, so like for me, I fell on the ice, I fell backwards. I had severe whiplash. And you think about people in a motor vehicle accident, they're likely going to have a whiplash motion, right? And so you've got a neck injury or a whiplash injury on top of a vestibular injury. So, how do you kind of piece that apart as a doctor when you're examining a patient? What are you looking for? Like, what are maybe some of the words they might be using to describe what's going on with them?
Definitely, that's a great question. This is something I tell students or interns we have all the time with kind of teaching is one of the first steps is just talking to the person. So a lot of times, if you can really figure out how they describe their dizziness, that can almost tell you where it's coming from. So if you look at things like, let's talk about ways people describe dizziness. So they may say, I'm lightheaded,
Yep.
or I feel like I'm floating, or I'm bobbing. Or it feels like the world's actually spinning, or it only happens when I move my head, or it only happens when I bend over. All these things give us different ideas of what systems are affected. Usually neck or cervical genic dizziness tends to cause more of a lightheadedness and kind of like a brain fog. It usually doesn't cause true vertigo. So one of the biggest things I see is I find patients describe their dizziness as vertigo all the time when
Yeah.
it's really not true
It's like the
vertigo.
go-to word because we don't know what else to call it.
Exactly, right? And that's the doctor's role, is to help to educate and say, well, here's kind of what vertigo feels like. This is what it seems like you're actually experiencing. So, right, vertigo is true spinning. So either you're spinning or the world's spinning, right? And
Like
that's
kind of
very,
violent spinning too.
exactly, like not enjoyable at all.
Right.
And that tends to mostly come from truly the inner ear, versus the neck really doesn't cause that. So the neck will cause a lot of times maybe a little bit more lightheadedness, a little bit more foggy, right? And then there can be different, when you get that symptom of kind of like bobbing or floating,
Mm-hmm.
that can be an issue with a part of the inner ear called your otolithic system, big word, but pretty much it's just that system that detects linear gravity, like we were talking about, right? It keeps us grounded so that when that doesn't work, we may feel like we're floating or like bobbing on a boat. A lot of endos come in, they say, I feel like I'm rocking side to side, forward and backwards, right? So all of these, the way people describe can give me an idea, right? So right off the bat, we say, this seems maybe a little bit more inner ear, maybe a little bit more vascular, i.e. they get lightheaded when they stand, right? And then from that, there's a few different ways we can differentiate. One of my favorite things is balance testing. And balance testing is really cool because it allows us to pull out certain sensory systems and have us rely on other ones to see which one's not so great. So I'll give you an example. When I'm standing on a hard surface, feet together, eyes open, my brain should be relying majority on my feet and vision, right? It really shouldn't rely on my inner ear. And people with serious inner ear injuries, they do fine in that scenario. And then I take away vision. And then I say, once I take away vision, how well do my feet and my inner ear communicate together? And then we put them on foam. And then foam skews what the feet are saying. So now I can say, okay, how does the inner ear and the eyes communicate together? And then we take away vision. And now we look purely at inner ear. And then we say, okay, if I turn my head right and left and forward and back, now I'm challenging my neck and my inner ear and saying, balance is I tell patients this, balance is a body reference frame. What I mean by that is if I'm falling backwards, it shouldn't matter if my head's left or right. All that matters is where my trunk is, right? So I tell patients, your balance shouldn't be any different head right, head left, head forward, head back. It should either be great in all those scenarios or absolutely terrible, but it should at least be the same, right? And when it's not, that lets us know there's some sort of mismatch between the neck and the inner ear. So balance is really cool because it lets us say, seems like it's maybe a little bit more inner ear, seems like it may be more visual, right? And so we take that along with the way a patient describes their symptoms, and then there's even more testing we can do. So there's certain bedside tests I can use to look at the actual inner ear itself and say, is there damage to the actual inner ear or the nerve? And then there's actual testing I can do to see, is it more of a problem with the way the brain is interpreting it all, right? Because a lot of times in head injuries, it's more the brain is scrambled. And so all this input coming in is normal, but the brain has no clue what to do with it, right?
Yeah.
So we have even further testing that can tease those out. And so all of that layer together can let us know, hey, your dizziness is definitely coming from your inner ear or your neck, or hey, it's all three. It's visual, it's inner ear, it's neck, and we got to fix this first, followed by this, this, and this. So I say, honestly, talking to a person first is sometimes the simplest way to figure out what's wrong with them.
Yeah.
This is rarely done. And then, like I said, I think balance testing is really, really helpful in figuring out more information, especially with the inner ear.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's amazing how we take things so for granted
Mm-hmm.
until they're broken. And then when your eyes, your ears, and your neck aren't all talking to each other, it's like if you drop your laptop on the ground and all of a sudden your screen's kind of like flickering and nothing's working right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I know for me, it was like this sensation. Sometimes I felt floaty, and other times I felt like I had just gotten off of a boat, right? Like I just kind of felt like I was swaying all the time. And previously, before my brain injury, I had true positional vertigo. And when I would roll onto my left side, the world was like violently spinning. And as soon as I
Uh-huh.
righted myself, it would stop. And, I kept going to all these specialists who kept telling me that I just had positional vertigo, and they would do the Epley maneuver. And I'm like, this isn't vertigo. I've had vertigo. And like, they
Mm-hmm.
just wouldn't listen to me. oh, it's vertigo. And they kept doing the Epley maneuver, which did nothing for me, and I've learned since the Epley maneuver is something like 80 or 90% effective with two treatments. So if you've
Yep.
had two treatments and it didn't help, it's probably not positional vertigo. And so we need someone like you guys. Um, so we've got the dizzy, we've got the the floaty feeling, and I know you said like this throbbing or lightheaded or pulsating,
Mhm.
that can be an indicator of a dysautonomic problem. So let's talk a little bit about dysautonomia, because I think way more people struggle with dysautonomia and have no clue what it is.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'd say most, and this is where I talk to students and other doctors too, who say, I always find it kind of comical, but not when, I talk to other doctors and they're like, I don't really see much dysautonomia. And I'm like, well, do you see a lot of head injuries? Like, yeah, I see a ton, but I never really see any. And I'm like, are you looking for it? Are you missing it? Because I would argue, I agree with you, it's very common. So what is dysautonomia? So if you break down the word, so just dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, right? So what is the autonomic nervous system? The autonomic nervous system, right, largely, we'll keep it simple, is you can split it into kind of like sympathetic, right, and parasympathetic. So rest, digest, and then kind of fight or flight, different parts of the nervous system, right? So those two systems are always kind of oscillating back and forth, right? And then they control everything that's involuntary. So my heart rate, my blood pressure, my respiration rate, so how fast I breathe, the saliva in my mouth, the tears in my eyes, the sweat coming out of my hands or my face, right? All these things that we take for granted that we really don't have to think about, they're all autonomic, right? So that's why it's called the autonomic nervous system. So with head injuries, because of going back to the brain, right? So the brain stem, right, the stalk right here, right? Whenever you have a head injury, there's always usually a rotational force. So you can think about it as if your brain is being wrung out like a wet towel, okay? And the problem is where that towel is being wrung out is all the pathways where all of your autonomic fibers are running, your inner ear, your vision. And that's why you usually see dysautonomia, visual issues, right? You see them all come together, right? So the problem is that there becomes dysfunction in the autonomic nervous system. This can give patients severe anxiety.
Yeah.
These are the patients where a lot of times they feel like my heart's racing, I don't know why, or I feel really anxious, I don't know why. My hands and feet, they're cold, but yet they're sweaty, or they're warm, but yet they're blue, right? And a lot of these patients will get discoloration in their legs, their arms. It's honestly, I saw this great, and it was from, I think, Dr. Kaiser. It was a post, but pretty much just any symptom you could get with a hangover, you can definitely get with dysautonomia. It's almost like it's like being hungover every
Yeah.
single day.
Yeah.
So for those of you who
Without
have
drinking.
had the opportunity to experience a hangover and a really bad one, imagine that on a daily basis. And that's what a lot of patients with dysautonomia experience. Now, within dysautonomia, you can have different things. So one of the most common things we tend to see is what's called POTS, or Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia Syndrome, which pretty much just means, so postural, it only happens when you change position, right? And same with orthostatic. So it's happening when you're going from maybe lying to standing or seated to standing, right? And then tachycardia, heart racing, okay? So normally, let's say an individual's heart's resting at 70 beats per minute. They stand, most of the research will allow anywhere between 20 to 30 beats per minute increase. For me, that's still far too much, right? But POTS is when an individual stands and then their heart rate starts racing really, really fast. So an individual may stand and their heart goes from 70 to 120, right? And the problem with that is that the faster the heart contracts, the less blood you can actually get out of the heart, right? And that's what creates the lightheadedness, is that your heart starts racing, you decrease blood flow to your brain, and you literally have a moment of hypoxia in the brain, right? If this happens once in a blue moon, not a big deal. If it's happening all day, every day, this is what leads to the terrible brain fog that comes with it. Or what you can see sometimes on imaging is actually microvascular changes or ischemic changes in the brain from constant hypoxia. And I would argue that dysautonomia is probably one of the most important symptoms or findings that one should address first. Because if someone, let's say, has memory issues, but they also have dysautonomia, and they go to a doctor and they say, we're going to do memory games. We're going to give you a ton of supplements. You're going to do cognitive rehab. You're going to be great. But if they still have a starving brain for oxygen, it's not going to be effective. So in my opinion, there should be hierarchies in dysautonomia comes first, followed by this, this, and this, because nothing's going to work if you're not getting blood flow to your brain. And that's really what you can think of with dysautonomia is there's tons of fancy names, like I said, POTS or orthostatic intolerance, but really it's simple in that all of them lead to less blood flow to the brain, which is not good for any function of the brain.
Mm-hmm. I know early in my recovery, I would get up to go to our, in my apartment building, our mailbox was kind of like through a tunnel and down into another building. So, probably like a city block is about what I had to walk. And I would get a quarter to halfway there, and I suddenly would be like, whoa, I think I might pass out. And then it would pass as quickly as it came. And I actually was worried I was having absent seizures, because I know those can be like really fast little seizures. And then it wasn't till after I got to functional neurology that I found out that that was dysautonomia. Like it just took my body that long, a half a block, for it to go, ooh, okay, we're gonna I think mine actually went down when I stood up, if I remember right.
Like your blood pressure dropped and everything.
Yeah. So it was like just the strange, it was like, ooh, the world's gonna go dark. Oh, I'm fine. And it was so bizarre. And then I would have moments where it just felt like my heart was gonna beat out of my chest.
It's a frightening thing. Like we said, memory issues are terrible, but there's ways people can compensate, right? They can maybe write a sticky note.
Right.
So there's all symptoms are not enjoyable, but there's certain ones, and dysautonomia is one where, just like gravity, unless you lay in a bed the rest of your life, you're gonna have to experience it and confront it. And I always tell individuals it's like you trying to stand up is like you going to do an hour-long workout, right? So for an individual that does a workout, gets their heart rate up, may feel a little lightheaded, that's what people are experiencing just standing up to go to the bathroom. So it will drain everything from you. And if that's not addressed, from my experience, no other therapy seems to really be effective.
Mm-hmm. So at your clinic at Integrate Brain Centers, what are some of the treatments you do with dysautonomia?
Definitely. So a few things. So I look at dysautonomia in kind of two ways, or this is how I think of it clinically. Okay. So one is you can think of what's called like a feed forward or a prediction. Okay. So every time you stand, your brain has to make a prediction to say, how much blood do I need to send to my head, to my arms, to my legs? Okay. So to make that prediction, you have to understand where you are. So everything we talked about earlier in regards to inner ear, vision, neck, all these other things, more often than not, people with dysautonomia have issues in those parts. Because if you think about it, if I don't know where my head is, how am I supposed to move blood to it appropriately? So I always look with every patient, say, is there an inner ear issue, a visual issue, or a mapping of their body issue, right? If they don't know where their leg or their arm are, and is that associated with their dysautonomia? Because if it is, we got to fix that first, and sometimes it will disappear, okay? And then the other is what I think of as more of what's called like a feedback. So when I stand in my carotid artery right here, I have different receptors. So when I stand, gravity takes blood and it pushes it into my feet. So I should be able to detect it in the artery right here. That sends signals and connects with my heart and then my brain to say, hey, you stood, let's increase your heart rate, let's increase your blood pressure a little bit. Right? A lot of times that loop gets disrupted within the brain, so the connection between the brain and the heart become disrupted. So one of the things that we do the most for those types of conditions is what's called kind of tilt table treatment. And that's where I can take individuals, put them in a table that's flat, and for some individuals, they might have had this done in the hospital. So tilt table testing is kind of the gold standard for diagnosing this, but a lot of people don't use it therapeutically, and we do. And so what we do is we'll put them in a table and then find at what point, right? So I'm bringing them up and then finding at what point does that system between the heart and the brain kind of malfunction. It could be 20 degrees, 90 degrees. It depends on the person. And what we do is we bring them up, we find that point, and then I'll bring them down. And what I'll do sometimes is I'll oscillate them all the way up to that point, and then I'll do things where I'll static hold, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm almost retraining that system of where I'm saying, take blood away from the heart, bring it to the heart. Take it away from the heart, bring it to the heart, and force the brain and the heart to create that connection again till eventually I can bring them up in the table all the way, and they don't have any symptoms. And then once they graduate from the tilt table treatment, then we start doing things actively, right? This may be starting to create a specific exercise regimen that may include, lunging, squatting, things changing position. But until someone can pass a tilt table test, it doesn't make sense to make them go run a bunch on a treadmill, which is unfortunately what you see with dysautonomia is the current recommendations are salt, compression sleeves, and exercise, which does help some people. But I would argue if you can't stand without getting dizzy, how can you go squat? Or how can you go hike up a mountain? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So pretty much going back to review, I look at it in two ways. I say, is there an issue with another system causing the dysautonomia? Most commonly, it's visual, inner ear, or what's called proprioceptive, so your ability to map your body and where your body is in space. Or it's an issue with feedback between the heart and the brain, right? And depending which one of those there are, we have specific treatments for those. And I should add a third note that I don't see a lot of people talk about is there can be a metabolic component to it. So there can be autoimmune conditions that can happen after head injury, infections. You can have a syndrome that's called mast cell activation syndrome, which is an immune issue that pretty much causes a release of a ton of histamine that then causes your vessels to become really big and dilated, that then gives you things like POT. So I'd say what separates us from a lot is that we look at as many things as possible that we know that can cause dysautonomia, and then we choose what is appropriate for that patient. Because if I have someone who has an autoimmune dysautonomia and I do just tilt table treatment, but I don't address their autoimmunity, I would argue I'm probably missing the boat and not getting them as the best care as possible as they could get, right? So that's where we take in blood work, lab testing, and then decide, do we need to do things from the metabolic side along with the neuro side to rehab this dysautonomia? So those are kind of really the three main ways we come about it is, fixing the inner ear and the neck and the vision, tilt table treatment, or doing more metabolic treatments if it seems like that is a reason behind their dysautonomia.
Mm-hmm. And, I think you're absolutely right with the metabolic. I think that is way too often missed. I think a lot of in particular, your traditional medical doctors, if they are checking your blood work, they're just checking the basic things: blood sugar, cholesterol, maybe your thyroid. But blood work that you guys do is way more involved, and I know it's like multiple pages of results when you get it back. And I feel like just too many doctors don't take metabolic into consideration, especially after a brain injury. When you think your brain runs everything, right? And I mean, everything. And so it can really throw hormones out of whack. It can throw, a lot of metabolic conditions, the autoimmunity. And yeah, so I think it's so great that you guys really incorporate the metabolic in with what you guys do, because it's really important. Because if there's an underlying metabolic problem, you're never going to fix it with tilt table and vestibular rehab.
No, yeah, I mean, if you have an individual who's anemic and they're not getting any oxygen to their brain, you can do as much fun, cool neuro rehab as you want. You could spin them in a chair 10 times forward, backwards. It's not going to make a difference, or it may make a difference, but it may not be as effective as it could be. So I agree with you. If you're not paying attention to the immune system or the metabolic aspects of a head injury, I would argue you're missing half of the puzzle.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Perry, I'm not seeing any questions come up, but we do have quite a few people watching. So hi to everyone watching us live. But Yeah, so I'm just really excited to have you here, introduce you to the group. Um, uh, those of you who maybe haven't heard the announcement, my new functional neurology partnership is with Integrated Brain Center, so with Dr. Perry and Dr. Shane Steadman. And I'm really excited. We have the concussion discussions coming up in September, and those are going to be a free series of videos with a whole range of doctors talking about just all sorts of different symptoms that you guys have actually written to me about. And so we're really addressing the specific questions that all of you have brought up in your journey. So I'm really excited. Dr. Perry, you're going to be part of the concussion discussions. And I think we have about 20 different providers who are going to be a part of that. And that is going to be brought to you by Integrated Brain Centers. And you can register for free at concussiondiscussions.com. And so, Dr. Perry, any final thoughts for our viewers today?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and this is kind of, I think what we talked about last time we talked, is don't give up hope. It's one of the sad things I see sometimes on certain like support groups, like various ones I see on Facebook or ones that I've helped out or spoke on, is the amount of the lack of hope that people have. The things I hear people say that their doctor said, and that there's really nothing that can be done. And I read these day in, day out, and I have such a hard time not just going on a page-long rant, and not because of them, but just because of how the healthcare system has failed a lot of patients suffering from head injuries or inner ear disorder. So I'd say, since we talked about kind of like dizziness, dysautonomia, if you're having those symptoms and someone told you that there's nothing that really can be done or medication is the only answer, I would argue that is not true.
Yeah.
And, like I said, we see a lot of different patients, and we tend to see a lot of the patients that have failed a majority of conservative care. And even with that, especially with dizziness patients, I'd say still probably 80% of them get significant improvements, and those are the patients that have failed most of what medicine has to offer.
Yeah.
So my biggest thing is just keep hope, reach out. There's a lot of great people. Like I said, I think the functional neurology world is probably one of the better ones when it comes to TBIs, just because they take into consideration the whole picture, right? You want to be careful with specialists. Once again, you may have a doctor who just focuses on the eyes or just the inner ear, or maybe a chiropractor that just does the neck, and those things could be great. But from my experience, you need someone who understands all of it and links it all together, and that's really where the magic is when it comes to TBI rehabilitation. So really just hope. Don't give up hope. There's always answers out there. There's always people out there who are willing to work hard for you and find solutions. So that's my biggest thing.
Yeah. So we did get a comment from Rebecca. She said it's discouraging because these services are not available. And are they available for people on Medicare and Medicaid? And, insurance is a whole other conversation. And unfortunately, most insurances don't cover functional neurology. However, I have met a lot of people who've gotten reimbursed a fair chunk back from their insurance. I don't know if you have more to add to that.
Yeah, no, definitely. We actually, depending on the insurance, have a lot of people that do get reimbursed. We do a lot of work with people too, where, we'll have certain, I guess you call them like angel funds or different things where people can apply for different things, depending on income, and that can help them with care. So we really try to offer as many options for individuals, especially if they're struggling financially, to make it as affordable as possible. The biggest thing I tell people, because it can be expensive, is though you could take, I tell people, even without brain injuries, you could take a few $1,000s and you could invest that in your health and see so much benefit. I see so many people who they'll spend $1,000 on their car like that for new tires, or they'll do this. But when it comes to our health and our body, we have this weird dilemma where we're used to insurance picking up the tab for us. And I think that's led us to have a hard time paying for these things. And honestly, a lot of times the work that's missed from individuals, the amount of money lost from missing work and missing those things is just exponential. So we try to really work with individuals. And like I said, we have all sorts of options that patients can apply for. that can help them get huge discounts on care and make it very, very affordable. So we try to really work with patients, and you're totally correct. Some insurance do reimburse a good portion of it. And another positive note to say is, unlike a lot of clinics, we do work a lot of times with kind of like personal injury. So some individuals who might have experienced it via a car accident or accident like that, where there's a case, those are opportunities where you can get care, right? And that's where we do work with insurance. So in those cases, that is very helpful for individuals because a lot of clinics like us don't take that type of insurance, but we do.
Right.
So that is helpful for a lot of individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a whole paradigm shift that needs to happen with healthcare, but definitely the best money I ever spent for myself was functional neurology. And I met a woman, she had kept track of all her co-pays. $30 here, $30 there. It adds up really fast when you're going to the doctor a couple times a week. So she had spent almost $4,000 in co-pays. And that's insurance coverage. So, so it's such a complicated system here in America. And even I know those in Canada, they still typically have to pay out of pocket for functional neurology too. But there's options, and I'm glad that you guys have other options available too. So, well, Dr. Perry, awesome. Thank you for being here. This has been a great conversation, and if you're watching this after the live, feel free to drop a question below, and Perry will probably hop in sometime later today or tomorrow and reply to any comments that he can. So thank you all for watching, and thank you, Perry.
Yes, thank you so much. Always a great time.